Warning, this episode may contain content that is not suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
A note for the listener. The stories that you hear at the beginning of each episode are either based on true events or are inspired by them. We cannot know exactly what was said during those events, but all conversations that you hear are plausible. The following episode contains content that discusses mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Joshua Broom turns the knob of his shower to hot and steps in. The water dripping down on his head slides right off and hits the shower pan below. He thought that a shower would help, that maybe, somehow, the water would make him feel clean again. But as the water goes down the drain, it doesn't seem to take his burden along with it, or his filth that he's feeling. It's still here. The pain is still here. The guilt and shame are still present. Joshua just finished acting in his first adult movie. Despite the pill the camera operator offered him, which was probably some kind of drug to put him at ease, he still felt the shame penetrating his heart. His friends loved the idea of it. They encouraged him to act in some more, especially since it made so much money. But what was his mom going to think? He knew that she would find out sometime, and he also knew that he had let her down. Joshua turns off the shower and steps out and looks at himself in the mirror, observing every detail on his face. He is a changed man now. He cannot turn back. He has already done one movie, and everyone is going to see it anyway. He might as well just do another one. Joshua steps back, giving himself one more glimpse in the mirror, and then walks away. As he leaves the bathroom, his reflection in the mirror disappears. This is almost like a metaphor of the Joshua he will become 5 years from now. Depressed, suicidal, and having completely lost his identity. Whoever he once was will be gone. He will be completely lost. The once happy and joyful Joshua having disappeared. The porn industry is going to destroy him, and it's only Jesus who will be able to save him from taking his own life. I am your host, Danique Godwin.
And I'm your co-host, Mikey Jenny.
And you are listening to the Light Studios Podcast, a show in which we seek to answer your most challenging Bible questions. Joshua Broom is one of the most well-known former porn stars who speaks out against the industry. After having acted in more than 1,000 adult films for more than 5 years, Joshua finally completely lost it. He told his director that he was never coming back and left California to start a new life across the country in North Carolina. But his sins didn't stay back in Cali. They followed him in his nightmares. It was only when he met a beautiful girl named Hope who introduced him to Jesus that he was finally set free. Now Joshua is married to Hope with 2 kids and he pastors a church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He's also an advocate against porn and is often invited as a public speaker. It was the porn industry that almost killed him, but Jesus saved him and set him free. Today's guest, Stefan Cullen, has been affected by the porn industry as well, but in a different way from Joshua Broome. Stefan's son-in-law was not a creator, but a consumer of the porn industry. While being married to Stefan's daughter, he started watching porn more and more until he got completely hooked. Stefan did not turn his back on his son-in-law though, but got him to follow a recovery program that Stefan had created. Through Christ's power, he gained the victory. If you want to hear Stefan's daughter's testimony on how she found hope in Jesus during this dark time in her marriage, you can watch it on our YouTube channel at Light Studios. Also, if you need resources to overcome masturbation or pornography addiction, check out Joshua Broome's program on joshuabroome.me or Covenant Eyes or Fight the New Drug. If you are the wife of an addict and need help, check out Wilderness to Wild. Now, let's dive into the episode. My assistant host, Mikey Jenny, is taking over for me as he speaks to Stefan Cullen about everything pornography and masturbation.
So basically, the Bible has a lot of answers for us, but it seems like sex is this one thing that it's like, if you're not married, then you can't do it, or you can't experience that pleasure. There's other things in life, if you're hungry, you eat. If you have an itch, you scratch it. But if you have this sexual urge, there's really nothing you can do unless you're married. So that brings up masturbation, because most people would say, hey, if you're feeling those sexual desires, then just go take care of it, right? That would be the answer that the world would give. But does the Bible have anything to say on this topic?
Yeah, without a doubt. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't say specifically masturbation, but there's lots of things in there that it doesn't specifically say. Okay, if you go to 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 34, okay, it plainly states there, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do. Right? So now it's covering, once it goes to whatsoever you do, it's covering everything, every facet of our lives. It then says, do all to the glory of God.
Good point.
And honestly, when it comes to something along the lines of masturbation, so self-gratification is really what we're talking about. Does it glorify God? And the reality is no, it doesn't. And in actual fact, it does a lot worse than that, in that it actually destroys the body slowly. It's an insidious thing.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Whatever you do, do it to the glory of God. And you mentioned self-gratification. I think something that the Bible teaches is to be a servant to others. There's nothing that Jesus ever taught that was to bring gratification to yourself. It's always, the government of heaven is going to be to serve others. And you're never going to have to worry about your needs getting met, because everyone is serving. So people are going to be serving you. And so I believe that's what is supposed to happen in the marriage. The way sex was created, it was to serve the other person, to bring pleasure to your spouse. And if you're both trying to please each other, then you're not going to be unfulfilled. So how can you do that if you're not in a marriage? How can you satisfy somebody else with that act? You really can't.
Yeah. Well, like one piece of advice that I give to people when they ask about these sorts of things, and sex in marriage and so on and so forth, you're talking about the fact that you're supposed to be there to pleasure the other. Mm-hmm. And the advice I always give is if you make your partner enjoy it as much as you're going to enjoy it, then you'll never lack for it because both people will want it.
Yeah.
You know, and if you stop and think about that, it feeds itself from that perspective because you're getting what you want while they're getting what they want. You know, and it's not just a straight up want. There's needs involved in this. It's not just a want thing. You know, we need the physical contact and the intimacy to keep us fulfilled and to keep us happy. And you know, it's not just a straight up physical feeling that we're trying to itch. You know, it's something that's more than that. It's deeper than that. Sadly, for the majority of women, you know, it is so much deeper than that, and they don't realize it now. You know, you've got all these women out there telling all the other women that go and do whatever you like, and it's all good. But women tend to give up more in the act of sex than what men do. You know, and the bond that their body naturally develops in that instant, in that small moment of time where sex is at play is greater, and the more they do it with different partners, the less that
They begin to get numb to it.
plays on them or affects them, and so the more they do it, the less likely they are to have a decent relationship with anyone else. Now, on saying that, men still have that reaction. It's just not as strong as what a woman has. And so if a man goes and does whatever he wants to do, whenever he wants to do it, then you end up in the same situation where the more time it happens, the less likely you are to have a decent relationship with a member of the opposite sex.
Yeah, that was really deep what you said about it's not just like an itch that you need to scratch. It's really, this was created for marriage. Like there's nothing wrong with sex. It was literally a gift from God that he created for us, but only in the context of one man, one woman in the marriage covenant together, because, you know, becoming one flesh, there are hardships that come into play. There's frustrations and things like that. And sex is just one of many acts that is like the glue that holds you together. It's this amazing experience that you only experience with your marriage spouse. That's the only time you're supposed to experience that pleasure, that act, and it holds you two together. You could have a big fight, and then you guys make up, and then you consummate in the bedroom, and it's like, whew, wow, I love you so much. And it brings up all those feelings. But if you're single, or, you know, you really don't have a need for that. It was never created to be just a dopamine hit. God never intended for us to just to have that self-fulfilled satisfaction like that.
No, that's right. That's right. You know, there's other means by which we can get that hit. You know, in learning, in playing in other areas, you can still get that dopamine hit. You don't need to encroach upon something that the Lord has made very special between two people.
I'm glad you brought that up.
And to do that, you cheapen it. You make it cheap.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up.
And ultimately, you know, the sex industry around the world, has done that. It's just totally cheapened the whole thing.
That's what Satan loves to do. He loves to take what God has made and pervert it, twist it, cheapen it. And now it's just like, you know, sex has just become a handshake, and their kids are doing it.
Yes.
And I watched a documentary called Childhood 2.0, and it's talking about how first base, what quote unquote first base used to be like holding hands or a kiss or something. But they said in this new social media time period that we're in, kids in middle school are passing around nudes. That's like the first base now, is getting a nude photograph. And then their relationship only lasts 2 or 3 weeks and they're broke up. And then kids are just trading these nudes like Pokemon cards. And it's just mind blowing to see how degraded our culture has become. We as a people have become, to where this beautiful, intimate act that was supposed to be, nobody was even supposed to see your naked body except your husband or your wife. And now, because of, the life of screens, make things seem fantasy and like it's not real. Well, it's just a picture. It's just cheapened everything, like you said. I'm glad you brought up the dopamine aspect, though, because I watched a whole documentary on dopamine as well. And by the end of it, I was like, why did God create this dopamine if it's something bad? And I realized it's not bad. When you witness to somebody and they start to have that aha moment and they start to see the light of the truth, you get that dopamine hit. You get excited. You're like, yeah, you see it? And it gets you excited. I want to do it again. If you're knocking on doors and you get rejection after rejection, but then somebody says, I'm really curious about this. I'd love for you to study more with me. You're like, yeah, let's knock on another door. That's what dopamine is for, to get excited about good things like witnessing and sharing the gospel, watching your child ride a bike for the first time, all those things that you were mentioning. But instead, Satan says, you know what? You can get that with this prostitute. You can get that with this drug that's destroying your mind and your body. And that's just how Satan has a counterfeit for everything, doesn't he?
Well, there's sports and that out there that people get it from. Mm-hmm. One of the classic sports that is really interesting to watch is the guys that jump out of planes in a bat suit. And it's one sport that just blows my mind because of how dangerous it is. The mortality rate is just phenomenal, right? But when you see these guys doing some of the things they do, flying through holes in rocks and all sorts of stuff, I understand the rush that is coming from it. Mm-hmm. But the reality is the cost benefit ratio really worth it? And in a lot of respects, when it all boils down to it, that's where the whole sexual revolution has taken over that sphere, and it's ruined the cost benefit ratio to the point where just the benefit is, you've got your rocks off.
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
that's a really good illustration.
And it was never supposed to be like that.
Yeah, never was. That's a really good parallel, because you think about how many marriages ended because somebody was seduced, and in the heat of the moment, they had that few minutes of pleasure, and now their whole family is destroyed because of that. And it's more than I did a drug. If you're in a marriage and somebody's like, hey, last night I had some drinks, that's probably forgivable. But to say, I fell into adultery, that's a little bit harder, and that can become the detriment of your entire family. And it comes with huge consequences, not to mention risk of STDs, unwanted pregnancies, all these things that come with it. But people are willing to do it because they just, like you said, that feeling is so good, but it wasn't intended to be that way.
You're talking about the kids, doing selfies, nude selfies.
Yeah.
One thing that has got really prevalent in today's society, and it's only been in the last sort of maybe 20, 25 years that it's got really prevalent in Australia anyway. We're probably a little bit behind you guys in the United States. But that is, when you meet people, you hug.
Yeah.
Right? And see, I tend not to hug other women, right? Other than A, my wife, or B, my daughter, or maybe my mother, right? They're the only people I hug from a perspective of a genuine, proper bear hug type setup where you're touching the whole body.
Right.
Right. So I don't like to hug other women because you get too much body familiarity, right? And so there's things that happen in your brain. If you stop and think about it, the first time you met a girl, just meeting her was enough to increase your heart rate.
Right.
And okay, the more time you meet up with her and everything like that, things change. And so that's not the same. But then, you're sitting somewhere and you brush hands, your hands just brush each other and your heart rate spikes again,
Yeah.
and that happens. And eventually you actually physically hold hands, and your heart rate spikes and you're getting all these feelings, and then it moves from there to you put your arm around her shoulder, and it, where it's going. It progresses from there further on, right? And to eventually you end up with sex, right? Well, to hug a woman, you're well down the path of where you were with that special woman that you once just brushing her hand was an amazing thing,
Yeah.
and the world has cheapened it so that it's quite fine to do that, right? Well,
true.
it's not really, because especially for women that get emotionally attached to situations, to have a bloke that genuinely gives them a hug that's a feeling genuine hug, that can start them down the path of being aroused and being wanting to go further.
Very true.
Like blokes can do that at the drop of a hat, and so we make silly mistakes fairly easily, and the fact that we're now doing it all the time with other women as well, it means that they're further down the path of getting aroused themselves.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, men and women are very different in that way. I have a question. What would you say to somebody who, we talked about how masturbation, it cheapens this great gift that God gave us. It was really supposed to be about pleasing another person, and this is only pleasing yourself. What if a person has never been in a relationship? It's pretty obvious they're probably never going to get married. What should they do with these desires? Because we are, as humans, we do have sexual desires. You still see attractive people that you get those feelings. Is that person never supposed to masturbate? What should they do instead? Like, what should they do with these sexual desires that they have if they're never going to get to have a chance to experience sex within the marriage?
Yeah, well, see, I'm not so sure that God expected that it was going to be something that we experienced right up until we get married, because when it all boils down to it, He's implanted things into our mind that alleviate that side of us. In that, men know, right? We all know that when we're young, we start to grow up, and all of a sudden we'll be sleeping one night and we'll have an accident in bed.
Right.
Okay, we call it wet dreams.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know when I was a young fella, as much as I had lots of desires for women and everything like that, I was also very much into sports, motorbike riding, and whatever else, rugby league. I enjoyed all sorts of sports. I didn't, as much as I loved women, I liked women and everything like that, I was really into sports to the point where I didn't dwell on getting that from women. And so on a relatively regular basis, I would have a wet dream in the middle of the night. Okay, and so it's not that a person that's not married can't have that happen to them. God does it in a different way for them that makes it not wrong. Right? So if you think that masturbation is fine, let's break it down a little bit. Okay? The reality is the action that you perform on yourself is an action that you're supposed to do with someone else in a part of their body that is set aside for that one action as well. Men think that, okay, well, I've got a hand, I can make a shape that's similar to that, and so I'm going to get it myself. Okay? Now, if you stop and think about it from that perspective, you're actually now a homosexual because it's a man-on-man thing.
Yeah, very interesting.
You know, and it totally twists. It twists everything that God wanted for us.
Wow.
Because of this supposed desire or needed thing that God put in us that we should be able to get this gratification. Well, no, it's not something that you have to have. Wow. Okay, it's not like food where you have to eat. It's not like water where you have to drink. Okay, like honestly, if you go back to the Old Testament and you look at the rules on what was supposed to take place, when a woman was having that time of the month and she was having an issue of blood, she was actually sent outside of the community because she was classed as being unclean. All right. So the men now, once every month, have to have their woman not even in their same house as them.
Wow. Yeah.
But outside the community.
That's true.
You know, and so self-control is a big thing that God expects of us all. Okay. The idea that the Bible doesn't talk about self-control is not accurate when you look at the texts that are out there. Okay. You know, Christ himself talked about it. Okay, if you go to Matthew 5, 21 and 22, it's talking there about hatred of a fellow man, okay? And it says, you've heard that it was said in time of old, thou shalt not kill. And whosoever shall kill is in danger of the judgment, okay? And then Christ goes on and says, but I tell you that whosoever gets angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother Raka, which is you're yelling, you're getting very angry, right, shall be in danger of counsel. And then, whosoever shall say thou fool unto his brother is in danger of hellfire. Okay? Now, most of what's happening in what Christ just said there is a mental thing. It's happening in your mind. Right? And so God looks at what we think a lot more than our actual actions, because, you know, David didn't commit adultery with Bathsheba until he looked the second time. You know, the first time he saw Bathsheba bathing on the roof, I'll near guarantee you it wasn't the first time ever that he'd seen a woman down there bathing. It's just that every time before that, he was fortified with God and he took no notice. He saw the woman, he went, oh, there's someone down there having a bath, and he'd go back on with his life, right? But when he actually when he did the act, he looked a second time and then he said, go and get that woman for me, I want her.
Wow. Yeah, that's very true.
You know? And so, okay, so you've got another example of that. Christ then goes on and he talks about adultery, right? Thou shalt not commit adultery, right? And he says, but I say unto you, whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. Okay? Yeah. So all of the pictures, all of the screens that, you know, have people, you know, having sex together, they're all things that we shouldn't be watching because ultimately we're committing adultery in that situation.
Wow. Yeah, that's really deep. Because ultimately God is judging the intentions of our hearts. That's what it said in Genesis. He said that every imagination was wicked continually. It doesn't matter if you're doing it physically. If you want to do it, then that's the intention of your heart. Most of the time, if somebody wants to kill somebody, they're not going to do it because of the consequence. Or if they want to commit if they lust after someone else, they won't do it because they're afraid of getting caught. But the fact is that they desire to do it. That's the sin. It's not a sin to be tempted. Jesus was tempted. It's a sin to give in to that temptation. Like you said, David, he saw her. He could have looked away and said, nope, I'm not looking at that. But instead he said, I'm going to look at that again. Yeah. That was giving in to the temptation. I love what you said about masturbation being almost like a homosexual act, because we don't think about that in other ways. You know, it's like if we all want to kiss somebody, but you wouldn't kiss yourself.
No.
Or if you desire a hug, then hug yourself. It just sounds weird. It doesn't even make sense. But when it comes to, I want to have sex, which should be done with somebody else, we'll say, well, hey, I'll just have sex with myself. So we should look at that just as oddly as if you were kissing your own hand or trying to kiss yourself or hug yourself. Why would we think that that's any different or more acceptable?
Exactly.
Also, there's an act of shame that comes with it that was not taught to us. You could have the most secular, atheistic person, and if they get caught in the act of masturbating, it's a shameful, guilty act. Where does that come from? Well, God has written his law in our hearts. We have a conscience, which is really the Holy Spirit telling us the difference between right and wrong. And that feeling alone should tell you that it's wrong. You don't get a feeling of guilt when you give a homeless person some money, or if you give somebody some food that's in need. Those things don't come with guilt and shame attached to them,
No.
but masturbation does, until you do it so much that you callous that, and you desensitize yourself to that guilt and shame.
Yeah. And those acts that you're talking about, going and seeing people and helping them with things, right, is never done behind closed doors.
That's right.
You always, when you go and do these sorts of things, sexual type things, it's so ingrained into us from a reality point of view. God, like you said, God put it on our heart. It's so ingrained into us from that perspective that we have to go and close the door so no one can see us.
Yeah, that should be the number one red flag right there. I heard somebody give the definition of integrity, and they said that's living life behind closed doors the same way you do in the open.
Exactly.
So if there's something that you're only doing behind closed doors, you shouldn't even question, is it really bad? Well, yeah.
If I go back to the early, examples of what's written in the Bible, okay, what was marriage? Okay, in today's society, marriage is a ceremony that we do in front of everybody. We give everybody a date and we say, come together, we're going to get married on this date. Okay, I want to read you a quick text out of Genesis 24, right? And it's how Isaac married Rebekah. Okay, just to give context, Abraham sent his chief servant off to find his son a relative, ultimately, to marry his son. Okay, and he comes back with Rebekah, and as they're coming back, they're coming through this field, and Rebekah sees Isaac. He was out in the field meditating on God, and she asks, who is that? And the servant says, well, that is to be your husband. And so she got down off her camel, and she started walking towards him, and he saw her and he started walking towards her. Okay. And when they reached each other, Isaac took her by the hand, and the text then goes on and says this, and Isaac brought her into his mother's Sarah's tent. Now, Sarah was dead by this time. Her tent was empty. Okay. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Okay. So they didn't have a ceremony per se. They went in and had sex, and they were married. We don't think of it like that. Sex has far more importance to God than we give it credit for. See, what's committing adultery? Is committing adultery holding a woman's hand? Well, in today's society, we'd probably say no. Like I have a different opinion on that, because I believe that holding a woman's hand is a prelude to sex. It's foreplay, so you're starting sex from that perspective. Okay, and so once you start down that path, you're already committing adultery. It's not as simple as it's far more complex, the whole path that leads to the act of sex, which ultimately ends up being adultery in the fullest sense of the word. But because of, like we were talking about there before, God looks at the inner, he looks at the mind and the intent of what you're doing and judges you on that.
That's very true. It's making me think of what you're talking about is making me think of 1 Corinthians 6 when it says, "What? Know ye not that he which is joined to a harlot is one body? For two, saith he, shall be one flesh." So people aren't going to marry a harlot. They're paying for sex. And it says that when you do that, you have become one flesh, which is what he describes marriage as. The two become one flesh. So you're right. The act of sex joins you to a marriage. And now you're one flesh with that person.
Paul writes a reasonable amount on sex, which is quite interesting. Yep. So you move a bit further into 1 Corinthians there, and it says in 1 Corinthians 7, chapter 2, it says, "Nevertheless, to avoid fornication." So what's fornication? Okay, if you look at it from a point of view of
sex outside of marriage,
it's sex outside of marriage, but it's also sex with no intent to have a relationship that God set sex up for. Okay, and so it's more than just sex outside of marriage. It's I'm going to do this just because I want to. It's a flippant. It's a use of another person, and so. To avoid fornication, man should get married. Okay, if you look at some text just before this, Paul's talking about the fact that he has given his life to the Lord and he is able to resist the temptation. And he says it is better for you to be that way so that you can give all of your efforts to the Lord. But if you can't, to avoid fornication, get yourself married, get yourself a wife, get yourself a husband, so that this doesn't come up in your life, right? Well, now it doesn't really have to come up in your life per se. It's everywhere. It's on the billboards as you're walking down the street. Yeah. When you're looking on your mobile data and stuff like that, it pops up as an ad when you don't even want it to. It's everywhere now.
Well, what would you say to a couple who's courting or dating, they've been together, they plan on getting married, the date is set, and what are some of the boundaries? Because would it be a sin or is it wrong for them to touch each other's genitals and masturbate each other? Because now you are pleasing the other person. Is this okay, permissible? Is it wrong outside the marriage? Is it considered sex, basically?
Yeah, I definitely believe it's considered sex. And so in counselling young people that haven't gone down this path, okay, I believe that the Bible is quite plain on the fact that you should not engage in anything along the sexual lines before marriage. So I'm not advocating sex before marriage by any stretch of the imagination in what I'm about to say, but the reality is that because of that text that I read you before about Isaac, okay, sex is something that God sees as being married, and so therefore, if you have set the date and everything like that, and if you've been dating for 2 years, for instance, right? Well, you've managed to suppress the urges for those 2 years. Why not continue to suppress them so that on your marriage night, you can have this amazing experience with your partner for the first time when not only you, but everyone else will see it as something that is allowable for you to do now, rather than going and doing it somewhere in closed doors where no one else can see. Now, I'm not saying that we should be exhibitionists and do sex where other people can see, but the reality is, we know we know when people are sleeping together because they start acting differently. Okay, they physically touch each other in a more different manner in public than they used to. Right, so we know when people have started to do those sorts of things. Okay, and so, going back to what I said earlier about the thoughts of your mind is what God looks at. Okay, so if a person in today's society is going to go down the path where they do have sex before they are married according to the laws of the land, so having the ceremony, then they really need to realize that God sees them as being married at that point, right? The marriage ceremony that they do in public a little bit later on is just so that the people in the general public can see them being married and can go, they're married now.
So what if the couple, they wait till marriage, they get married, they have a beautiful honeymoon, they consummate the marriage, and then later they say, you know what, why don't we spice things up? What if we watch pornography together? And both of them agree, this could be fun. Is that wrong? And does doing that have a negative effect on a marriage, that a couple who's married, they're in agreement to, yeah, we watch pornography together? What do you think about that?
It's one of the fallacies of the whole sexual revolution, is the fact that you can do it with multiple people, you can watch other people doing it, you can be involved in all of that, and it really makes no difference. And that's a fallacy from perspective of
right.
The more you watch others doing it, the more likely you are to go and do it with someone else, because the needs of the flesh will eventually overrule the wisdom that you're supposed to have in your mind, and so you will eventually end up in a situation. I've got a relative that was involved in swinging. I gather you guys would know what swinging is.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Two people in agreement that we can sleep with other people as long as we stay true to each other, in a sense.
Yeah. So they go out for a meal together with another couple, and then they swap partners for the night and go off and enjoy themselves. Okay. And you know, that all goes along fine right up until it doesn't. Okay. And so in the situation that I'm talking about,
right.
the male counterpart decided that, you know, eventually, it was after a long period of time of them swinging, that one of the women that he was with, she was really good, and so he actually then decided to go and enjoy himself with her outside of that accepted agreement. Okay, and it nearly cost him his life.
Right.
Okay, the woman nearly killed him. Right. And it's all because once we normalize something that is supposed to be kept strictly between a loving couple, it's supposed to be strictly, and so you can't watch pornography, you can't, you know, tell each other that it's fine to watch pornography, because the reality is your brain doesn't see the people on the screen as a fictional being. Your brain sees them as a real being, and you're watching someone else have sex. Okay? It doesn't matter that they're being paid to do it. You know, it really doesn't. That doesn't change the fact that your brain sees it as being, this is literally other people having sex together, and we're enjoying it with them. Right? So eventually your brain is going to go, I need more, you know? And so, like I said, with the example I said, you know, the husband ends up going and doing it outside the agreed boundaries because he wanted more, you know, and that's the way it goes. So pornography is very insidious from that perspective. It seems like that it's not something that can cause that much trouble because you're doing it on your terms, you're doing it in your bedroom, you right? But the problem with that is, okay, the couple that you're watching, they're in another bedroom. So now it's not actually in your bedroom, it's in both of your bedrooms. You know? And this is what it's done. It's created this whole aura of it's okay because we're doing it. No, we're not doing it because we should not be doing it. Right. We should not be looking to find that sort of gratification outside of the marriage relationship. Now, I guess there's a situation where, you've got marriages that are getting old, and they've got into a rut, and, so they feel as though they need more. And it's the greatest danger period for a marriage is when that starts to happen. And in all honesty, and I've talked to people about this that I've counseled, right? If you actually then stop and realise that the effort that you're going to put into finding another sexual partner, if you put that effort into your own marriage, your marriage wouldn't fall apart.
To think about it practically, just replace the phone or your TV that you're watching it on with a window. Most people think it's immoral, disgusting to be a peeping Tom and go looking through somebody's window at two people having sex. But now we replace that window with a screen and it's perfectly okay. Or some people think it's acceptable.
Yeah.
And, we would be upset if your spouse glances at another person that you walk by in the mall, but now we're going to watch them have sex and think it doesn't cause a problem.
Yeah.
When you are watching now there's comparison. Oh, wow, he's built differently than you. She has this that you don't have. Wow, she does that thing that you never do for me.
Yeah.
And so now there's comparison that you would never have in the real world without devices. You would never just stumble upon a situation where you're suddenly watching two people have sex. And these devices have put a whole new perspective on the things that we deal with and struggle with. And we're to the point where people are saying, well, is it really that bad? I mean, it's just TV or whatever. It's not.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be recorded anymore. Like, Mikey, you and I are having a discussion at two different times in two totally different countries, and that's what's available to these people now. You might have a fetish where you want to, you would love to, have a relationship with a Greek woman, for instance, and your wife goes, oh yeah, it'd be interesting to have a go with a Greek man. Why don't we find some on the internet and we could do that together? And it can happen together, virtually, just over the radio waves, and so it's so much worse in today's society because you now don't even have to go down to the adult store to get the video or the whatever you want to look at. It is available to you on your device, wherever you are, whenever you are. Doesn't matter, and so it's bad, and the results in terms of marriage, the statistics out there are very condemning of this whole situation, because just having one extra partner in your life, right, reduces your ability to have a genuine, loving, fulfilling relationship by 50%. Okay, the correlations are just huge with how bad it is. Statistically speaking, the more you have, the greater that gets, that you're going to then have a fulfilling long-term relationship. Okay, back in the old days, we're fairly amazed that people could be married for 45, 50 years, right? But stop and think about it.
Right.
If you give your life to one person, right, and you love that person to the absolute utmost, okay, by the time these old people get to their mid-90s and you go and ask them, how about their relationship, they look at each other with goo-goo eyes and they're going, yeah, she's just my partner. She's the one I've always wanted. And she says the same thing back. And we look at it in today's society and we go, well, how is that possible? When everything is new and fresh and hip and you can watch wherever you want to watch, you can say whatever you want to say, all on a screen that gives it to you at the click of a button.
Yeah, that's so true. There used to be a time when you knew everybody in your social circle. You either went to school with them, you go to church with them, you work with them. maybe you travel a couple miles outside of your town, but you didn't know. Now it's like you just go window shopping. Like, wow, there's a chick that lives 2 hours away and we have everything in common. You know, you would have never got to know that person in an age before digital social media, phones, and all that. But it's really caused a huge problem with relationships where they're not even able to last anymore.
Yeah. I like the way you say, you know, there's a woman 2 hours away that you've got everything in common with. You know, that's also one of those terms that is thrown around in today's dating society that is a total and utter fallacy, okay? That getting, you know, we've got so much in common with each other. That ceases to be once you become married and you start living in a marriage environment. There is always differences and there's always things where we need to compromise as a partner on. Now, don't get me wrong, that can get abused. I understand that can get abused, where one partner expects the compromise from the other partner all the time, and that's wrong, right? And that could well be with sex, for instance. You know, the one partner expects their other partner to compromise on everything when it comes to sex. Well, no, that's not right. That's not the way God wanted us to be. And so self-control and maintaining an upright attitude towards everybody, including your partner, is something that God always wanted. It was supposed to be that you have self-control, okay? Like, honestly, if you look at Galatians 5, okay, Galatians 5 verse 17 through to 21, it says, for the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary one to another. So if you're going to do what God wants you to do, it will be contrary to what your body naturally wants to do, because we're now sinners, right? And then it goes on and says, now the works of the flesh are made manifest, okay? Everyone's going to be able to see what the works of the flesh are, and they are adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like. So all the things that the world, ultimately, when it all boils down to it, the world really doesn't like all of these things that were just written, right? But some things are okay to do, even though the world really doesn't like them, okay? You know, I find it quite amusing when politicians get dragged over the coals for getting caught with a prostitute, you know, when they all do it. You know, I'm not sure what it's like for you in America, in Washington, where your capital is, where all the politicians go. But here in Australia, in Canberra, okay, per capita, there is more prostitutes in Canberra than in any other city of Australia. Why? Because the politicians all get into what they shouldn't. You know, and so,
I'm sure it's the same here, actually.
Yeah. Deuteronomy 14:3 says, thou shalt not eat any abominable thing. Okay? So, you know, right back at the beginning, you said, you know, that sexual desires is the only thing that we're supposed to keep a check on. Okay? And yet there's many places in the Bible where, you know, eating, thou shalt not eat any abominable thing. Well, why not? That means you've got to have self-control, okay? Yeah. That's right. You're not supposed to look at another woman and lust after her. Why? Because, well, it's wrong, okay? And so in everything that you do, whatever you drink, okay, we should not be drinking alcohol. Why shouldn't we be drinking alcohol? Well, it's fairly plain to see that people do really stupid things when they get drunk. Things that they would never do ever when they were sane and sober. You know, I used to enjoy going out when I was young and a bit of a ratbag. I used to enjoy going out to parties where there was drinking happening and watch people go from sane people that have got full control of their bodily faculties and their mental faculties into just babbling idiots that would do anything, you know? It's just incredible to watch.
And yet we feel like, oh, you know, the Bible just wants us to not have fun. But
yeah,
God knows the beginning from the end.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Satan loves to package up sin in something that looks fun. You watch the movie where these geeks at school, they finally get to go to that raging party that all the popular kids are at, and they have a blast, and then the credits roll. What they don't show you is the drunk driving accident that killed somebody on the way home, the unwanted pregnancy that ended in an abortion, the addiction that was started at that party, the STDs that happened there. Like, Satan loves to show you that short season where sin is fun, because sin is fun for a season, but then it leads to death and destruction, and not just of you. It's not just a victimless crime. It destroys families. Your people that love you are seeing you destroy yourself, and you could lose your job or whatever that could cause problems in your family. There was a question that we had about, is it okay to use a picture of your spouse if they're gone on a long journey? And maybe that would include virtual or phone sex or things like that. What would you say to something like that? Because now you're involving your partner in a way, but it still seems pretty self-gratifying, right?
Exactly. It goes back to what we talked about before, where, really you're doing it yourself and you're a man. And so should a man gratify a man? It doesn't matter that you're looking at your wife. That's really irrelevant. When it all boils down to when I'm away, and I've been away from my wife before, when I'm away, I don't need sex or the gratification that comes with sex in order to see my wife in my head and know that she's the woman that I want to go back to, and be the woman that I'm not going to mess up on because I don't want to wreck what I've got at home, and it just means that, I do my work better, more efficiently so that I can get back to what I've got at home, because, like we said right at the very beginning, God put this need and these desires in us, and when we respect and honor it, okay, it is so much better. Right. And like I said before, you see these old 95-year-olds that have been married for, 50 odd years, and they still look at each other goo-goo eyes, like they've only just met each other. Well, why is that? You as people, we really need to stop and think about why is it, and what is the bond that can hold a couple together for that long and still be so in love that they look like they're only teenagers when they're looking at each other. Okay. I guess from a sort of practical point of view, when it comes to people being away from each other, what you were just talking about. Okay. There's ways and means of stopping yourself from getting in a situation where those thoughts and desires might come up, and that is, if you look at it from a biblical perspective, and I don't have this one as a text written down, but God talks about the fact in the Bible that idle hands, right, end up being and doing things that they shouldn't do. We shouldn't stay idle. So, how would you practically stop yourself from being like that? Well, make sure you work hard enough that when it's time for you to go to bed, that you're tired enough that you just want to go to sleep, so that those sorts of dangers don't enter in, and if they do enter in, what's a means by which you can, circumnavigate past it and get through it? Well, okay, get up and do some more work. Do something practical to take your mind away from the temptation that has been set before you, and like we've already said, the temptation is everywhere. It's on the screen. It's on the billboards outside your window. It is everywhere, and I feel for the people that have got these problems, because, if you're trying to give up drinking alcohol, okay, there's one really easy way to make it easier for you to stop drinking alcohol, all right? And that is, You don't go and visit with the people that you know are going to want to make you drink alcohol. They're gonna try and coax you into drinking, right? Don't go to a pub.
Peer pressure
Don't do anything that will lead you to that. Okay, and so it makes it a lot easier to get over it. Right? Tobacco is the same thing. Don't go anywhere where you know smoking is going to be, and they might have a spare one that they can give you. Right? Whereas with sex and right. the whole thing, the pornography thing, it is everywhere. There was an ad years ago up on a billboard in Sydney when I went down there one time. Okay, and it was for Levi jeans, denim jeans. Okay, and it showed from the waist of the man to his knees. Okay, and what it then showed was that this man was quite well endowed, and it was hanging down his leg, and the jeans were tight over it, so you could see the shape of it, right? Now, that was years ago.
Wow.
How do you get away from stuff that is so blatant and in your face? And they say women aren't affected that way. Well, I'm sorry. The guys that do the advertising, they do lots of studies to work out what will get people. And honestly, if it doesn't work for women, then why do they do ads like that? Because, most blokes are not going to look at that ad and get sexually aroused. It's going to be the women.
So how would you tell somebody to approach their spouse if they find, that history, that they see some things in the browser that they shouldn't have been looking at, or they find the magazine? What should a spouse do to approach that? Should they come at them angry, more sympathetic, or what way should they come at them? And is there anything to do to help you overcome addiction? Because this is an addiction just like anything else, a drug use. What would you give? How would you counsel somebody in that position?
Yeah. Okay, so, all right, anger will never work. So you definitely can't come from an angry point of view, even though you're going to be pretty hurt yourself. Mm-hmm. I understand that. I really do. I understand that it's going to be quite hurtful. But like in my relationship with my wife, okay, she's opened up the history of the computer, and she's seen that there's been the odd page, and by odd I mean extremely odd, that is shown, right? And they've popped up simply because I've clicked on the wrong part of the screen. It's not because I want to. And so if you come in with anger, right, saying, "Oh, you've been looking at this," when no, I actually haven't, please, I definitely don't want to be like that, right? And so that can be dangerous to come in with anger, right? So find out whether it's true to begin with. And then with my daughter, for example, okay, she knew about it for a little while. And so she tried to get her partner her husband to change and to not do it anymore. Being young and naive, she didn't realize that it was, a harder problem than just that. And so it went on for quite a while, until eventually she came to myself and my wife and told us about it. And, my advice to her was, you've got to make him realize how bad the things that he's doing is, and how hurtful it is to you, and that you need to do something about it. And sadly, okay, the advice then is, if they're not willing to do something about it, then they're ultimately committing adultery. And so therefore, it is the one reason that the Bible gives that you may separate from your partner. So you can't let it keep going. Like, letting it keep going just compounds the issue, and sadly for a lot of women,
it's enabling.
Oh yeah. A lot of women feel as though they've got the best man they'll ever get, and they just need to stay there and all that sort of stuff, even though they're now, they're a pygmy in their own stature because they feel so poorly treated, right? That they don't think they can get away from it. And yet the reality is, okay, no one should have to put up with that sort of mental abuse. Okay, you should not be in a situation where that type of abuse is allowed to continue. And so ultimately, my advice for either partner in that situation is you have to meet it head on, and you have to make sure that there is a change. So I've got another couple that I counselled about 4 or 5 years ago, the young man, he'd been doing it ever since he was a young fella, and the first time he came to me with it, he genuinely broke down and he cried about the fact that he'd done it, and as time progressed, I actually realised that he wasn't actually sorry for what he was done. He was sorry for getting caught, and so just recently their marriage has actually fallen down because as much as he supposedly went and did some counselling and everything like that, he didn't do it for the right reasons. He didn't genuinely want to stop, and so it got that bad to the point where when he decided that it was time to come clean again, he actually wrote his wife an email that said you might want to go and get yourself checked for STDs. Now, how hurtful would that be to a person? To get an email from the person that they're supposed to be, in love with and everything like that, you better go and get checked for STDs. Like that must have been so demoralising for the poor girl. And I've talked to her about it since then, and it was extremely demoralising for her. But now, because he's not interested in changing, okay, their marriage is finished, right? And so there has to be genuine change. There has to be a real commitment to change, and it takes a long time. Like honestly, you can go and look at the statistics and what the actual psychologists say about it. You're looking at years for a man to get over that sort of an addiction, right? And so as much as you may want to let them back into your life, there has to be certain reservations where the other partner begins to build a bridge. And so 100% of the leniencies that they once had don't get back until they've completely built the bridge back. Trust is something that is earned. It's not something that is automatically given, especially when it's a relationship between different people.
Yeah, so you definitely want to act fast, but be smart. Don't jump to conclusions. It could have just been an accident, but if you have all the proof in the world that you need to prove that they are doing it, you need to address it. Don't just think it's going to go away on its own. It is an addiction, and it can lead to harder things, just like drugs. You try marijuana, that isn't giving you the satisfaction it used to, so you try something harder. Well, pornography is the same way. You start off looking at softcore porn, turns into hardcore porn, turns into, hey, I'm going to try it in real life. And now you need to be checked because the woman I was with outside of our marriage has an STD. And I mean, that is just detrimental where it can lead.
One quick little point, talking with people and trying to get them through their issues. Like there is even issues where, the partner is getting more than enough sex. They're getting sex on a regular basis from their partner, but they still go and get it from porn as well, right? So it's not because one of the partners is not giving out. It's because it is a real problem, and it's something that, from a talking and a discussion point of view, we really should do more talking about it from a balanced point of view, a biblical balanced point of view, because it is so insidious. It seeps its way in to everywhere.
And sometimes, you just really have to think about it kind of rationally and stop just trying to go along with the culture and things like that. And, like I said, remove the aspect of a screen and turn it into a window. That changes things. I like what you said about some of the practical things about, you have to replace that thing with something positive. When I was trying to stop drinking, my brain was programmed that when I'm thirsty, I need a beer. So I had to just chug as much water as I could fit in my body. I would drink a whole gallon to fill my body with something good so that I couldn't put that in there. So if this is an issue that you're having, remove anything that could potentially be a trigger. And when you get tempted, do something with those idle hands. Like you said, go work on a hobby, pray for sure, read the Bible, do something to fill your time and that idle time with something positive, something godly, something that's going to take your focus and attention off of that temptation. And really, we can only overcome these things with the power of God.
I am Danique Godwin, and you are listening to the Little Light Studios podcast. If you like our show, make sure to leave us a comment and a 5-star review. Do you want to learn more about the Bible? Go to lls.tv/Bible School. And lastly, don't forget to give us a follow on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Little Light Studios. We would love to hear from you.